All right, well, welcome to Analyze This, where we speak with some of the top IoT industry analysts to get their perspectives on the state of the market. I'm your host, Allen Proithis, and with the brain power we have here today, I expect that these panelists will be immediately recruited by Elon Musk's Doge team upon the conclusion of this session. But our format today is simple. We'll start with each panelist giving a short self-introduction. We'll jump into our topics and time permitting, and with a lightning round and audience questions. And now we have a few more minutes. So to start out, again, I'm Allen Proithis. I am the CEO of Capstone Partners, where we are an advisory that accelerates connected business. And up until 2.5 weeks ago, I was a CEO of a private 5G company called GXC, the only provider of mesh cellular in the world, which I sold to a large industrial. And IoT background, in addition, includes building a network covering 70 million people for Sigfox in North America, and forming and running a joint venture with Sony for IoT globally. So, Alex, you want to start us off with self-introductions?
Thank you, Alan. Yes, my name is Alex Besen. I'm the founder and the CEO of the Besen Group, LLC. We are a boutique consulting practice. We offer strategic advisory, business development, market research, and training services in the mobile data industry.
Wonderful. Matt?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Matt Hatton, you can probably tell from my dulcet tones that I don't hail from this side of the Atlantic. Based in the UK, I run a boutique research consulting firm called Transforma Insights. I've been an industry analyst for 25 plus years, and I'm a little bit worried that Jurassic Park is now described as an old movie. You might not have heard that one from an earlier panel, but that worried me a little bit. But anyway, focus of us is all things IoT, really, and I've been looking at this space since before it was IoT, back when it was M2M, and then telematics before that, and we do a lot of work around market forecasting, technical and commercial best practice in everything related to IoT.
Well, thank you, Matt. As I tell some of my nieces, sometimes I have shoes older than them.
Yeah.
Carl, tell us about your background.
My background is I worked for Bell Atlantic, 9X, the merger of the Bell Atlantic 9X team, which is a whole different story, which under beer I might actually tell you the whole truth. And the most important thing is that I've been working in the IoT space now for about 20 years, and worked on the first soft switch, worked on changing technology, worked on VoIP, whatever that is. And now I don't do VoIP, I do VoIT. Voice over IoT, which I'm watching that kind of nonsense happen, and I'm staring at that going, that makes no sense to me.
We're going to jump into CAT-M already. All right.
Yeah, there's a whole stack of IoT applications that need voice. Come on, it's important.
Yeah, I understand.
But if you call them IoT, nobody's going to buy them, Matt.
We'll get on to that, Alan.
We'll get on to that.
That's a topic.
You can tell this is a punchy crowd.
VoIT is just a volleyball. That's all you need to know.
Well, thank you, Carl. Thank you, everyone. To start out, it's funny. You might have heard about this newer thing called AI being popular lately. And, AI is the most voracious consumer of data the world has ever seen. And when we talk about IoT, IoT has always been about, at its most basic level, it's gathering data to then take more intelligent actions, usually to save money, make money, or regulatory compliance. Really about giving you insights to your business. So at a highest level, my personal thesis is there's no better segment than IoT that is actually prepared for AI to be applied to it. So Matt, start us out. What's your thinking about the marriage between AI and IoT?
Yeah, I think you elaborated on that very well, in as much as IoT is kind of where the digital world interfaces with the real world,
Okay.
if I can put it that way. And as a result, anything AI that might involve the real world is going to need IoT data, and so there is a fundamental huge amount of value. Oh no, I'm fading in and out. I do have an answer to this question.
That's rather strange.
I might need a different.
Maybe, we all have loud.
Let me talk to this one. There we go. Okay.
Yes, so speak to Carl's armpit more.
Thank you. So you've got an environment where you're creating a huge amount of data, and there is a tremendous amount of value of applying a set of analytics to it. Now, that's not necessarily anything new, and we heard on one of the earlier panels around predictive maintenance and so on, and this is something that's always happened, but this pointing of AI at the IoT data allows for an additional set of value associated with just doing much more inferencing and an understanding of what the trends that might be coming through from the data. And effectively, it's part of a continuum, right? You start with wanting to monitor a thing, and then you want to manage it, and then you kind of want to automate it. And so then there's an evolution into intelligent automation, and we're seeing that in things like delivery robots and a whole host of other use cases where effectively the AI is embedded within the application and part and parcel, and there's a kind of feedback loop from the AI into that device as well. Now, there's a couple of implications of that, which is one, you end up needing a lot more processing and storage and capability at various points across the network. That might be on the edge device. So increasingly, we're seeing AIoT devices with embedded processing that can cope with and specialist hardware chips and so on that can cope with being able to process AI on that edge device. And there's also a requirement for orchestration across the various different elements, because where that processing and storage sits within the network is going to vary depending on what the application needs to do. So an AMPR camera is not going to be sending a stream of data of everything that it's looking at back to a central server. It's going to be sending a number plate and saying, I have seen this.
Well, you hope. That's the smart thing. There are some
Yes.
people who say, I need to see everything in real time. And you say, there's not enough spectrum. Please talk to your fiber supplier.
There is. And what you'll find is there's a question of, and anybody who was in my session yesterday, this is going to sound a little bit repetitive, but there is a question of subsidiarity. You do that, or you should be doing the thing at the point in the network that makes the most sense, and that might be on the edge device, or it might be a campus gateway, or it might be somewhere in the base station for the mobile network, or it might be in the core. And it's going to vary depending on the application. It's probably some combination of all of those things, and then there's a requirement for orchestrating that. So this idea of actually I need all of that. Well, maybe you don't, but you need to work out where you put that point of analytics and how you manage the processing of that data and the pushing out updates of the AI instances and so on. So it adds a huge amount of complexity to the space, but presents a lot of opportunities because someone's got to perform that function. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that was a very long and rambling answer to a question.
That's
not
okay. That's
necessarily
why
helped by the
that.
technical challenges.
And no one cares about orchestration until you need it. It's funny.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's important. But it's funny. Alex, the world of there's low data, there's high data, there's in-between stuff. I know you focus a lot of your time on 5G space, private 5G, and that gets into high data applications, like all these fancy, sexy words like autonomous, digital transformation. None of them happen without AI, and none of them happen with massive data. And there's no way to collect that data without private cellular in some ways. In fact, we announced the GXC partnership with Intel and Dell in October to be their private cellular partner for Edge AI, because there's no other way to collect all that stuff you need to then apply AI to it. So what are you seeing sort of on the private 5G side, in terms of how it's enabling these type of AI applications?
I think it's a little bit early right now, Alan, in the market. I think that we have not seen anything actual commercial deployment yet, but there's just the beginning of the private 5G announcements on the publicly commercial available right in the industry. So it's just I think beginning. I think we will see it maybe in 2-3 years down the road. In terms of the AI, and the private 5G. Having the impact.
So what's driving the deployments that you're seeing on the private side of the world?
I think they realize enterprises looking at the existing connected solutions like a Wi-Fi. They're not going to be satisfying their needs, connectivity needs in their facilities. or looking at the wireline connections. So they are looking at the private 5G in terms of the low latency, more high speed, in terms of the connecting the devices or the offering the more, I would say, reliable and secure solution to the workers or to the machines in the facilities, factories.
It's funny, like one of the things I said originally when I joined GXC a few years ago was no one buys a private 5G network either, or a LoRa network for that matter, just because having a network is cool or it gives you fresher breath or anything. They buy it because they have something specific they need to connect that impacts their business. And without that, you really don't have a justification for any kind of network, including the public networks, and that's probably part of the operators' problems of they forgot to develop any new revenue streams with 5G, which is slow deployment. But Carl, when you think about some of this stuff, there's a lot of new data starting to be generated here. So do you have any thoughts, Carl, about how does edge play with all this in your mind?
Well, the big issue I've got is, and this gets into the I need to collect everything mode, right, is where do you cut the back and where do you edit and how do you take advantage of it? Everyone talks about the large language sets. I'm an IoT guy. I actually want to talk about small language sets because I think that what we need to do is focus in on what we're trying to accomplish with AI and not focus in on having the entire internet. I made a joke earlier about the fact that, guys are showing me different personalities on AI, and I'm sitting there going, I don't care about personalities, I care about the data, right? I care about what I get from it. I want to make it so that I have something relevant. And the big fear I have is that people are going to have what Chris and other people have decided the term for is hallucinations out of AI, where it's sitting there and it's collecting the wrong data. And my goal, personally, is to make it so that the data that I get is accurate and germane to what I'm trying to accomplish. The last thing I want to do is end up in a situation where I decide, oh, I need to collect everything. The funny thing is, when it comes to IoT, our pricing is pretty much down in the bottom. We're not exactly driving people
I would respectfully disagree with that, Carl.
Well, I appreciate that.
If you're talking about public network, low data stuff, maybe. It's a very commodity business. But I think that's just a small piece of the value chain
I agree wholeheartedly.
of the IoT stack.
I yield to that point. But the point I'm making is everyone sits there and says, oh, it costs so much. And you sit there and go, I really can't get any lower on some of the low end stuff, We're not going to sit there and, go down to rock bottom zero free pricing for, the amount of data and the value that the data is, right? And that's the thing that keeps getting lost, is they keep looking at the price per minute, and it's not about the minute, it's about the value of the data. And how do we take advantage of that data and how do we use it? So that's where my head's at with the stuff.
See, I look at it from a more system stack perspective. And I think, how many people here, and this is a little outside of IoT, but more AI-ish, but how many people here thought that Elon Musk was crazy for paying, what, 44 billion for Twitter when he bought it? Okay? Everybody, okay? And then all of a sudden, you wake up one day and you say, well, he has the biggest database in the world to train AI. And the analysts are saying now Grok is probably going to exceed everything in the next quarter because the level of data he has to use, that he has data, because that's part of the problem with AI. They can't get enough data, especially stuff that's not, that you have access to that's not copyrighted. Because, AI is the biggest plagiarist that ever existed. But on the commodity connectivity side, Matt, an interesting development how, NB-IoT to me was rolled out a bunch of years ago because the operators saw the non-cellular options of LoRa and to an extent Sigfox, and they're like, we need a competitor. And so they sort of rushed out NB-IoT, which required a rather heavy software and hardware network investment versus CAT-M did not. So what's your thinking now on sort of NB-IoT finally being abandoned for other things?
And you're alluding to the AT&T announcement last year that they were going to.
It's not getting a lot of NB-IoT is not getting a lot of love anywhere, but especially here at AT&T land.
Yeah, it's I think it's easy to write it off as a technology, but if I can bring an example from the other side of the Atlantic, if you told somebody in Spain that NB-IoT was going to be not part of the mix of connectivity technologies, they'd tell you were crazy because there's connected beacons that need to be put on every vehicle or in every vehicle for emergency breakdown calling, and there's going to be 25 million of those, and there's millions of smart meters, and you're looking at tens of millions of NB-IoT connections in Spain. So that network is not going away anytime soon.
But there's an economic justification to keep it.
Yes, exactly. So it's become increasingly apparent that the only dynamic in which wide area connected technologies make sense for IoT is where effectively somebody else is paying for that network, i.e. smartphone users, right? So you can piggyback on LTE networks. LTE-M is kind of partway between the two, but you've also got Cat 1 bis, and then as you evolve to 5G, the same things apply. Now there's another question about 5G and those devices being just too expensive. But it really only makes sense where you've got either you're piggybacking on an existing network, or you've got some kind of tent pole client that is going to pay for that deployment. So smart metering would be a perfect example, and there's probably a few others. But if you're in a market where you haven't got those things, then probably it doesn't make sense, which means that it becomes a national technology in the same way that public LoRaWAN is likely to be a national technology, and Sigfox is likely to be a national technology, because you've got a patchwork of different deployments. So if what you want to do is connect washing machines in 20 countries, you're never going to do it with any of those technologies. But if what you want to do is connect some streetlights or connect some smart meters or whatever, which are inherently domestic, then it makes sense.
Yeah, I always like people who have products that's basically a big metal box that don't understand why they can't get a signal out.
Yeah.
But
yeah, washing machines is a bad.
Well, washing machines, it's like, wow, we can't get a signal out of this thing.
I got a Faraday cage.
But it's funny, Matt. You talk about I think it took the LoRa and the Sigfox people 10 years to realize that economically there's no economic justification for a standalone network. Okay?
If you build it, they will come. Does not work.
It does not work. It didn't work for Sigfox. LoRa's a fantastic technology, but building it as a public network really, didn't work. It really hasn't worked for anybody. And we've seen all the people who try to do that sort of go away or get absorbed. And that's why I think private networks, whether it's a low data like a LoRa or higher data like a 5G network, Alex, is really what makes sense, because you're putting the network where you're going to get economic use out of it. And Carl, did you have a thought here?
Yeah, well, no, we've got movie references here. Okay, so if you build it, they will come comes from Field of Dreams, and it happened to be right at the time when fiber was getting deployed. And the thing that was missing for LoRa and for other applications is that it was really an aggregation capability, right? It got the White Sox there, and then it got the rest of the teams there, right? It got all the major ball players to the Field of Dreams. Likewise, fiber became basically the backbone for wireless and wireline. It became basically the core for everything. And then we got WDM on top of it, which made it even more cheap and even more effective to use, right? So the carriers were having a field day. It was a field of dreams for them, right? And now I'm sitting here and we look in retrospect, and the mistake that LoRa made was the fact that it sat there and said, we're going to be an aggregation point. Well, an aggregation point for what? That's the thing that people keep forgetting, is it really comes down to the application is what drives the deployment. And that's the core that I wanted to bring up. So thanks.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Carl. And where I was going with Alex is, so what I've seen in private 5G, what's driving it, it's sort of like, first of all, you don't have connectivity. If you think about warehouses, industrial buildings, they're basically a big metal box with metal shelves and metal equipment. So you've basically built a Faraday cage and wondered why you don't have connectivity. And so that's why, the other thing people hate is that when you walk outside on a campus, you're going from private network to a VPN on a public network, back to a private network, and more companies hate the security exposure of jumping back and forth between these networks. So the use cases we've seen driven, it usually starts with one stupid thing. I can't connect my corporate apps for inventory. I have to bring product halfway through a warehouse because I can't even scan it to ship it because Wi-Fi doesn't propagate. But very quickly, I've seen things moving towards computer vision on the edge. A lot of video surveillance with a lot of AI on the edge. But this gets into spectrum questions. And I don't mean to geek out. I know this is a US event, so we'll probably talk about a certain spectrum band versus Europe. But how do you think about how spectrum intersects with these IoT applications? Because especially when we get into high data stuff, like, has anyone here ever heard of a LoRa gateway running out of capacity? It's extremely rare, okay? But when you start putting on these high data applications on, you're going to run into different service levels. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, Alan, I think the spectrum is the ultimate as a key success factor for private 5G networks, right? Most of the private 5G networks today, they've been launched on the CBRS spectrum here in the US, right? But CBRS spectrum, has these two different models, the license model and the share spectrum. But given the power level requirements, so there are sometimes challenges to deploy it outdoor, right? So they're, I think, better for indoor usage, in terms of warehouses, factories, than looking at the smart cities or parking lots or shipping ports, for example, or airports and outdoor deployments. But some other operators, they are also leveraging their own license spectrum, for the private 5G, mostly on mid-band right now. But we see also some, given the applications, and like hospital, for example, they are using a millimeter wave band spectrum. So the combination of the mid-band and high band spectrum, So we will see that. I think the majority is on the mid-band spectrum in the US today,
Of course, band 48 with CBRS spectrum, which is 150 megahertz for anybody who wants to geek out. But frankly, it's funny you say about the outside, because I agree it's easier to manage it inside because you don't have any interference from anyone.
Yeah.
Because the Faraday cage works both ways, right? Yeah. Outside, though, we found it costs pennies per year per square foot to do outdoor coverage on corporate campuses because Wi-Fi runs at such low power level and for other technical reasons I won't bore you with, doesn't work well outside. Whereas private cellular just propagates like crazy, even at the lower power of a private network. So you're right, in a smart city or port where you have a lot of ships coming in using the same spectrum and it causes a lot of interference, it's a problem. But corporate campus-wise, I've seen some really good results. So it sort of depends on how clean the spectrum area is where you're trying to deploy.
Yeah. I mean, you will need more radio units if you want to do outdoor deployment. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it will be definitely an impact on your cost for the private 5G network.
Yeah.
And that brings us to 6G and all that promise.
This isn't a fantasy episode, Carl.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
This isn't fantasy talk here.
Well, it's 2040. I mean, we might be around.
We have a great 6G session this afternoon at 2:15. I know some of the panelists personally since I'm on the panel. But yeah, if we get into 6G, I do get asked sometimes, are we going to support 6G? And I start, after I stop laughing hysterically, I say, of course we are.
Yeah, once you know what it's going to involve, which no one does yet.
Psychic pets and all kinds of stuff. Who knows what it's going to be. So, Carl, I know you love...
Joe Bacuzzi knows what it's going to be.
All right, excellent. And some of my friends from InterDigital have been in the standards committees for years, but that's yeoman's work. So, Carl, you love politics, okay? And we're not going to get political in terms of one side or the other.
Well, no, you did already.
But... You just said you love politics.
You misstated which is the largest database that Elon Musk has.
Well, that's just that. Silicon Valley. And so let's talk about, we have a new administration that's throwing tariffs around. What if any, impact can we expect from the tariff talk on IoT?
Oh, I'm not sure that's going to be a focus on that. Right now, CAR's really focused in on the issues associated with free speech. We've got the whole 15-digit dialing capability that's going to be a nightmare for all of us little guys who do VoIP over technology and all that capability. I watched one guy bang his head while Richard Shockey was talking about what the future of technology regulation is going to be. I think we're just going to play it by ear on this. I don't think we're going to see a lot of technology battles going on when it comes to the spectrum side. I don't think they're paying attention to that. However, with that said, I'll remind you that the last time Trump was in, there was a desire to have a government-oriented radio network.
Well,
and we might see that come back.
I think I heard that name. I think it's called FirstNet.
No, there was a second effort from the DoD that was being done. Actually, Boeing is deploying Semper AI right now in a test trial on basically making it so that Air Force One and all the other government planes could in effect have their own private spectrum network. So we'll see what happens there.
Good luck with that. The volume of radios does not incent unit economics, shall we say.
But there's an extension beyond, just to come in on the regs thing. There's an extension way beyond tariffs, which is around compliance with other rules, which are, I mean, there have been sessions on this over the course of these 3 days, but essentially the compliance requirements across everything related to IoT has become much more stringent, whether that on the security side of things, but more relevantly to this question of politics, vendor selection, basically. Can you use Chinese manufacturers?
Well, look at the Quectel announcement around CES time.
Yeah,
where Quectel is finally, even though they use Qualcomm IP, but they have such a large percentage of modules in the IoT space, I think that's about to change rapidly. Now, they're doing some things to have alternatives, shall we say, but I think the Quectel thing is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, I have an anecdote here for you, though, to consider, which is that we ended up talking to a specific company who was deploying FirstNet response computers. And we ended up with a situation where the FirstNet response computers were going to be using Quectel gear. And we sat there and said, don't they know better? You know, that it's not a good place for first response. And they said, well, the customer basically said that they didn't want to use HTTPS, and they only wanted to use HTTP. So if they're going over the open internet to begin with,
who cares?
Does it really matter that they're using Quectel gear, right? So you've got a back door, but your front door is already open. You know, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So it was an interesting statement by the manufacturer who was sitting there going, doing what the customer asked, and you know, they're paying the bill.
That's a big joke about TikTok, right? If they already have my passwords, can they please share some because I can't remember them? But Carl, are we done top of the hour? What's our time frame?
Yeah, we're top of the hour.
Okay, so 5 minutes. So let me just take a deep breath here and just canvass the audience. Questions so far in the last 5 minutes here from the audience that you are dying to ask this esteemed panel. I'm having trouble seeing because of the light here. Questions? All right. So we have just 5 minutes left. So let me go to a lightning round. Okay? Short, pithy responses to controversial questions. Carl, let's start with you. I'm trying to keep you awake. All right?
I'm here.
All right. So you have $10 million. Okay? You have to invest in a particular IoT application or vertical in 2025. You can't just keep it on stupid stuff and cars and boats and stuff. Where do you spend that $10 million in IoT? Any vertical, any application, any technology. Where do you spend that money?
Campus environments.
Really? What kind of campus?
I have a bug up my tush with hospitals.
They have doctors for that.
Hospitals are, you know, talk about Faraday cages. They're just everywhere in the hospital. And I would spend my entire time trying to just get one hospital, and I think I'd use all the money, trying to get that one hospital to have full connectivity.
It's funny you say that because in Europe, especially Netherlands and UK right now, there's a bunch of hospitals that had 5 megahertz of old 2G spectrum that all have to go to LTE right now. And they don't want to go to 5G. They just want to go to LTE because it's more than enough for what they need, and it's only 5 megahertz, and that's exactly what's going on, even though they have Wi-Fi boxes everywhere. All right, Matt, where you right?
Interesting point on that. LTE is good enough. We just did a report on the opportunity for 5G standalone, and the conclusion of that was even though 5G is going to be most of the cellular-based IoT market shortly, 2035, 2040, most of those use cases don't need anything more than LTE. They're migrating because that's the technology that's going to be available, not because they have an inherent requirement for.
Yeah, we were doing full autonomous vehicles with LTE.
Yeah.
Where you need 5G is when the volume of stuff on it goes past a certain point.
Yeah.
But you can get the latency in a pretty good place with LTE. So Matt,
But I completely didn't answer your question, so I'm going to answer your question now.
For you, it's 10 million pounds, though.
Yeah. Okay. Right. It's about the same nowadays.
Right.
Okay. So. Anything related to video analytics, or maybe not anything related to video analytics, but the fact is that you've got a increasing sophistication of AI associated with analyzing video streams and being able to effectively replace IoT sensors with a set of cameras in a factory to be able to do a whole load of new things, but also replace what the IoT devices were doing. So in retail, in manufacturing, in logistics and supply chain and so on, that's the space.
Fantastic. Alex, where are you spending your money?
I will spend my money on indoor campus neutral host systems.
Neutral host?
Yes.
You're still one of the neutral host evangelists. Good for you.
Yes, because, I mean, if you look at it, Alan, 80% of the traffic is indoors, right? 80%, right? So, and the operators, they do not have a good coverage indoors. So, the neutral host is the only way for the consumers.
It's funny you say that, Alex. If we had more time, the topic I would love to discuss is the intersection of DAS and private 5G in the whole concept of neutral host.
I would love that.
Because it's going there.
Yes, yes.
Okay, we'll make that a session. However, I got to say, there's some interesting IMS stuff that's going on with the SIMs. I'm sorry, I said ISM, SIMs. The whole ISIM management function has got some real interesting things going on with different companies that look a lot like a neutral host now. And I'm trying to get my arms around, things like what's going on with the Israelis and some of the other companies, and where that's going to take us, because it's a different model than we're using right now for most people.
All right, one last quick question, and this is very outside the box, but we have university graduations coming up in May, and a question I get asked more and more, because the average person, even though they use technology as a consumer, especially when they have children in university and college, and they're saying, what should my kids do for a living when they get out of school, or what should they study? Given all this crazy AI, IoT stuff going on. And Alex, let's start with you. When someone comes to you and asks you that, what do you tell them?
I mean, my son, Allen, graduated from University of Virginia, and he became a data scientist.
That's one of my go-tos.
Yeah.
One of my go-tos. Matt?
Plumber, electrician, those kinds of things that you couldn't get a robot to go do. Skilled jobs that require it to be a person.
If you can be a plumber or electrician that actually shows up when you say you're going to and talks like a human, I think you can be a millionaire overnight.
Yep.
Carl, what's your advice?
I'd let people go into IoT, but only to support the plumbers and electricians and those kind of functionalities.
No, and I always say, too, I think these are all great answers, and I always say, what's often missing is the business expertise to tell you where to apply AI in IoT, because frankly, you don't want to spread it like peanut butter across the board. There's things that are much higher value than others, and what we forget is it still takes a human to actually exercise judgment of how to apply these kind of things. So with that, top of the hour, thank you for coming, everyone. I think we'll be around outside after the session if you'd like to talk to us, but have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists.